Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another STHLM TECH Meetup. I'm your host, Tyler Crowley, and looking forward to getting into this. Let's do as we always do and jump right into the deck. First slide lets everyone know we are live at StockholmTech.com, STHLM TECH.com. I think it also works at live.stockholm.tech, and you'll see a YouTube player on the website, and if you click through to the YouTube player and you use your YouTube app on your phone or in your browser on your computer, you can join the live chat. And if you join the live chat and you say something during the live chat, I can push it into the show for everyone to see. It's kind of a cool thing that we do. So do that when you can. While I go through the deck here, you can make comments, and when the guest comes on, you can also engage with the guest through the chat room on the YouTube app or website. So enough about that. Right into the news. Swedish health tech startup Mendi crowdfunds 3 million for neurofeedback device, and this 3 million, to give you some context, was just ranked as the highest crowdfunding in Europe for 2020 within the healthcare space, and by far the second highest was less than 2 million British sterling. So it's quite an accomplishment. Congrats to Moha, my friend, and everyone on his team there for doing a fantastic job. And yes, John, like this. John Manicherry is commenting in. Welcome, John. And on with the slides. So speaking of crowdfunding, our friend Martin over at Transparent Speaker, which make these really cool black rimmed and white rimmed now kind of clear transparent speakers that are really beautiful, kind of Swedish design, is launching right now, literally this second, the Light Speaker, his newest device, a portable sound and light experience. Make any place feel great with a Bluetooth speaker, light lantern built to last a lifetime. It glows like a real flame with your music. So that sounds incredibly cool. You can go to the URL there, bit.ly, bit.ly, and you can take a screenshot with your phone or with your laptop of the URL. This YouTube video will be live on the website forever, so you can go back and watch it if you need the URL there, but there it is. But go there if you want to support that. Digital pharmacy startup Medina raises 5.6 British sterling million. And then the Voi founders investing in some Klarna veterans who making a new startup, calling themselves BrickPay, have raised 6 million. Podme raising 25 million from Schibsted. And a jackpot for Swedish security trio called Point Sharp selling for 100 million. Then Next Story raising 165 million. ML with a Neo4j, an incredibly cool database innovation, bringing in 260 million. And let me see if Cyan's trying to join. She is. Here we go. And back to the news here. So here we go. Digital electricity supplier Tibber raises 65 million in US, so that's about 650 million Swedish, led by A-Roads in Balderton. Lendify raising 115 million, so that's actually about a little over a billion SEK to expand. They've had an incredible growth there. And then Voi now expected to raise over $1 billion. And Nordnet going public with $1 billion US, which is 10 billion Swedish. So it's just as usual, things keep going, even in this COVID pandemic year that we seem to find ourselves in. It hasn't seemed to slow things down. And then this came out just this in the last couple of days, a table showing investment in top global cities for impact investing. And not a surprise, I guess, that San Francisco is at the top of that list. London and Paris, Berlin and Stockholm very close in a tie for fourth place. But very cool to see. As we all know, Stockholm, only 1 million folks. able to compete at the highest levels, especially on something as cool as green tech and impact tech. So that's very cool. And hello, Taro and Depu and Solson. I see your comments there. And speaking of the growth of European tech, here this also just came out in the last couple of days. European tech ecosystem has ballooned to 618 billion in combined value, and there's a year ago it was only 422, and 5 years ago it was 155. So it's been quite a nice growth up. By comparison, the U.S. has been relatively flat actually during the same time frame. So it seems like there seems to be a shift going on. And to that point, here's an article in Telegraph about why Sweden's on the verge of another tech revolution. And it might seem unrelated because they're totally separate stories on totally separate sites, a few days apart. But I think there's some relation here. Here you have Silicon Valley loses another tech icon. Keith Raboy leaving Silicon Valley. He's moving to Miami. He also happens to be the guest for next month on the Tech Meetup. So we'll be talking about this issue for sure. But it'll be really interesting to see which folks out of California should find themselves in Stockholm, perhaps, or in the Nordics, anyways. And then I have a comment here. Martin is chiming in about a fundraising that nobody seemed to have noticed. 90 million SEK investment to upgrade the Space Center. Cool. And I also happen to know of 3 fundraisings that have not been made public yet. Just in trying to find the startups to pitch for tonight's event, 3 of the 10 people I asked had just closed their seed and A rounds. So I won't name names, but it was a whole lot of congratulations in my Facebook chat messages this week. And hopefully we'll have those ready for the next month's meetup. And here's another article, same point, different person, also leaving California, in this case moving to Texas. And these are major publications, and this is sort of the main narrative when you think of San Francisco at the moment. It seems to be a lot about the disintegration of San Francisco in the city and the life quality of life going down, but at the same time, people leaving. There's sort of an exodus happening there within the tech, and that certainly plays into where people are going. That they're not going to LA, and they're not going to New York. In fact, people from LA and New York are also leaving the tech communities to a degree in those areas. So it does equal out the playing field, and I think that does bode well for Europe in general, London, Paris, Berlin, Stockholm, as the tech centers of Europe. And time will tell, and we'll see where people end up. It's probably no coincidence that Sequoia just announced they're now launching Europe. And in fact, they were going to be the guest this month, but we plan to do it live in Stockholm, but we can't do it live in Stockholm because of the uptick in the new winter COVID cases. So we have to do it virtually, so we rescheduled. But anyway, on with the deck here. Foodora veterans invest in ghost restaurants, or as in California, as we call them, cloud kitchens or virtual kitchens. And this is another big trend already starting in the US, and it's no surprise to see it picking up in Europe as well. But this is where things will be when people are locked up in their houses. There's no point in paying to have a retail restaurant to use that kitchen. You can go get industrial park cheap rent space and make a kitchen and a virtual restaurant in a very cheap industrial park and do all of your deliveries from there through an app. And that's a huge opportunity, which of all people, Travis from Uber is really kind of leading that charge in the US with cloud kitchens, which he started a couple years ago before people even knew what it was. And my God, he said at the time it might be bigger than Uber, and now it seems like he was right. Another big trend on the horizon, there's another big wave of Bitcoin price surging that people don't seem to be talking about much, like last time. But one of the interesting elements is this article kind of touches on Iran, the government using Bitcoin itself to get around kind of the U.S. sanctions, so that because the U.S. dollar kind of controls is the fundamental currency of the banking systems internationally. And so Iran's not allowed to participate in that when there's a sanction. But if they're using Bitcoin, then they can trade with folks. And this is how I believe Bitcoin's, the optimism that a lot of people have around Bitcoin. I think the adoption, it will be interesting to see which governments adopt it first. Because once a governments start adopting it, opens up a whole new chapter, which coincidentally, or maybe not coincidentally, is related to this big uptick that we're seeing in the price of Bitcoin as we speak. SpaceX Starlink is up and running, and more satellites going up. It seems every week, and there's now many tests, people showing their speed tests. They're getting 160 megabytes per second, which is faster than 90% of U.S. connections, and they're reaching places. Native American tribes that have never had any connectivity are now getting online for the first time, and this is also a real a real groundbreaking, game-changing situation to have. The politics on it is really interesting. Just now they're talking about the fact that there will be coverage over India, and this will be not be held really by any government's control, in essence. So many times you have governments trying to get data from ISPs and things like this, internet service providers, and in this case, they can't. And what's to stop somebody in India or even a communist country like North Korea who has blocked internet, or China who has a blocked internet? This is a way for people who, if they have a dish, no one necessarily will know that you have this little device to get to the satellite and get around the conventional, gatekeepers of internet availability. So it's incredibly interesting in ways that people aren't yet really talking about. Similarly, facial recognition was found out to have been used to identify a protester in America, where it wasn't known that the police had this technology, let alone that they're using it and arresting people with it and charging people with it. But here we are. And it's, again, a whole new data government issue, which we're only just seeing the beginnings of. Here's another interesting point around government data. Austrian press reporting that the EU Council of Ministers have almost completed a resolution on the table to ban end-to-end encryption on apps like WhatsApp and Signal. And what it means for lay people is that there are some apps that have end-to-end encryption, which block anybody from being able to see what's going on in the communication of these apps, and governments don't like that. So the governments are trying to force apps to open up so that the governments can see what's going on inside of these apps. And then that leads to, as Balaji tweeted a few hours ago brilliantly, many apps are being forced to censor even the president of America at the moment. And in fact, Facebook and Twitter recently have been censoring still President Trump. He's still president until January at least. So the censoring him in that way, they now just had Jack Dorsey and Mark Zuckerberg do video conferencing into a Senate hearing where they quizzed them about this. If they share this information with each other about, who they want to block and who they don't, and you have to watch for yourself and see what they said. It was quite interesting. I won't repeat it. But first you get these platforms that are censoring people, and then people leave, the users and audience start leaving these platforms, as seems to be the case with Twitter, where there's a new competing app called Parler in the US, which is the #1 app in the US at the moment. And then people leave publications where they get censored, like the big publications, the New York Times, and those New York Times journalists are going over to Substack, where they're talking. and they're more or less free to do what they want, and they haven't been banned or censored there. But eventually, pressure by governments will be put on those new apps, theoretically. And then from there, where do you go? And then where you have to go into your own self-hosting of your own decentralized solution so that governments can't interfere. And again, this goes back to the Starlink, why it's so interesting and why decentralization and things like Bitcoin are so interesting, because it circumvents the government controls. But that's where kind of the real friction of where tech is at the moment, is the control of these platforms between censorship and platforms and the government. So really interesting to see where all this goes. And hello to Joseph and Martina. I think we just have a couple more slides in the news here. My own, kind of ending on a better, friendlier note, for the Swedes and people in the Nordics who are living through the terrible Novembers of darkness, endless days of darkness, there is sunlight over the horizon, metaphorically and literally. There's multiple countries have contacted me recently that want me to promote that they have special visas, and they want to invite the Stockholm Tech audience to apply. Australia, most notably, I can connect you directly with the lovely lady who's running that program. Singapore and Thailand as well have their own special smart visas for startups that they want to attract to come work here during the dark and cold winters. And then Helsinki, I guess, is trying to do the opposite. They want to get people from the rest of the world to come and experience the slushy cold winters in Helsinki. This one will be starting in February. And it's an interesting concept, 90 days as a Finn, and they help you move your family and the schooling and all of that and the apartment finding and everything. It'd be interesting to see if we get Stockholm to do something similar. So that's the news, and a huge thank you to all of our partners before we welcome our guests here. EY needs no introduction. It's one of the biggest accounting firms in the world, but you might not know that they also love to help startups with their management consulting, business consulting, and finding investors and courting investors and legal, all kinds of things. Visa also needs no introduction. But they're, besides being, the credit card in your wallet, everybody's wallet, they are incredibly engaged now with fintech and where it's going. And all you have to do is Google them and see that the recent massive acquisitions they've been making of fintech companies. They're making huge plays in the fintech space. So they're an interesting one to watch. Esri is the biggest player in geodata. In fact, they invented it many years ago, many decades ago. Capole is a very innovative agency out of Stockholm that I can put you in direct contact with. If you want to work with big enterprise clients, that's who they work with, especially as it relates to innovation. So you can message me directly and we'll set up a meeting with them. EQ2 Ventures is one of the biggest and still one of the newer big venture funds in the Nordics, and still involved in most of the big deals happening. NASDAQ needs no introduction at all. That's where everyone ends up. The Swedish Energy Agency is investing in a lot of the green tech, which is, thank God for that. Vinga is the biggest law firm, and Nordea is the biggest bank, but what you might not know is they absolutely love startups. And I'm happy to introduce both of them, and they make it very easy to work with them. They speak startup language, and they have special people on their teams to work with startup people, and I'm happy to put you in touch with them. So thank you to all of them for making this possible. And that brings us to Anna from Pelterion. And actually, kind of speaking of EQT Ventures, Pelterion is one of the very cool companies that EQT Ventures has invested in. Anna, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
You are, great. You have a slide that I have in my deck, so I'll go back to my deck and show that in a second. Do you want to go ahead and tell us what it's about?
Yeah. Okay. So thanks so much for having me. My name is Anna. I work in business development at Pelterion. And I'm here today to tell you a bit about an initiative we're running, which is called the AI Accelerator Program. where you get help from some of the best data scientists out there to build AI into your startup. So I might know what you're thinking. There are lots of programs out there. Is my slide on now, Tyler? Or should I?
Yeah, your slide's on right now. Yeah.
It's on. Cool. Okay. Lots of programs out there. Why should I spend time on this particular one? Well, if you think you have a problem out there that can be solved with AI, there really is no quicker way to find out. And building AI is famously both time consuming and expensive, but with the right support, you can get a first iteration out there very quickly. So whether you're thinking of building it into your product, setting up an MVP for future product feature, or if you just want to automate an internal process that's taking a lot of time, this program can help you get a quick start. So who's eligible? Companies with fewer than 15 employees. So hopefully that should include quite a few. Do I need to be a data scientist to join? Absolutely not. You can even get by without code. And this is kind of the whole point of what we do and the platform we built. You don't need to be a data science expert to start applying it in your business. How can I learn more? Well, sign up to join our startup program information session on the 3rd of December at 3 p.m. CET, and we'll tell you all about it.
Very cool. Thank you, Anna.
Thank you.
Yeah. And that brings us to Cyan. Cyan, are you there? You in the Zoom room?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I do hear you. You sound great, and I see you.
Oh my gosh! Thank goodness.
Great to see you.
Hi.
Hey, welcome.
I'm having a tech morning.
One of those days is what is
One
it
of those
called?
days.
Mercury in retrograde. I haven't looked to see if it is, but
Yeah, exactly. But I've cobbled something together. I'm on a little Surface Duo, and I'm here, so that's all that matters.
You look and sound great. Good enough.
Great.
But it's a fun connection. Can I ask where in the world are you, or what part of the world?
Yeah, I'm in San Francisco, California.
Nice. And I'm in Thailand, and we're doing the event live in Sweden with a whole group of folks. But it works. That's
Hello, everyone.
The new world that we're in, yeah? And so we've first met back in 2007 and have crossed paths many times, usually at the launch festivals and some Open Angel Forum dinners, of which I have a very fond memory of Uber's first pitch, where we were standing literally shoulder to shoulder at a little cocktail table. And Travis was pitching Uber for the first time. And there was one car in the whole system, one driver, one car. And I remember fondly watching he was one of the users. I think there was like 50 users of the app at the time sharing one car, one driver. And they had big, bold plans to add more drivers so that more people could enjoy, sharing a private driver. And then the driver showed up outside, and I remember you turning to me and you saying, "I think I want to do this." And
Yes.
And you did, and I think that turned out very well for you.
Yeah, I remember that night very clearly. I mean, it was pretty transformative. The interesting thing is seeing Travis up there pitching, which I wasn't expecting. I was expecting to see like Ryan Graves or, someone else. But yeah. And then the other thing is the only driver that they had was my driver. So that was also really bizarre because it was the same driver that took me to the airport. Was the only driver that they had.
Yeah, I remember the goosebumps when the driver pulled up outside because you watched this car drive on the phone, to the location, and then sure enough, everyone turned their head to look out the window, and this black Escalade pulled up. And I remember the reaction was almost visceral. It was like the investors were like, I remember Jason jumping out of his chair. He's like, $50K, and Shervin was like, "I'm in," and you were like, "I think I want to do this." And Saka was like, "I'm in," and they raised their 350 or 300-ish, right there on the spot within a few minutes.
Yeah, that life-changing dinner, let me tell you.
Yeah.
So thank you for that.
Yeah, that was fun though. Yeah. I would love to hear if you have similar stories, because I think people, they hear these, everyone knows Uber, of course, and everyone knows SpaceX, and a lot of these massive companies, but it's hard to imagine just the details of just how simple and innocent these things are. I mean, in the case of Uber, we were in San Francisco on Pier 38, which at the time was Dogpatch Labs was running a kind of an incubator there, and which, by the way, Instagram was part of, and they were working about 20 meters away from our little dinner that we were having with Travis, when they were 3 people at the time, actually. And but how does something like SpaceX, start off, and some of the other investments that you get into, they have similar humble origins?
Well, yeah, I think most of them do. And I think one of the things that they all have in common, the ones with this sort of outsized returns, are that a lot of people don't believe in them in their earliest days. So Uber, even though that was a successful dinner for them, they had a series of no's leading up to that dinner, where people were just like, no one's going to get in a stranger's car, no one's going to stay in a stranger's bedroom, was the Airbnb
Right.
thing, right?
Yeah.
No private citizen can launch a rocket.
Yeah.
So it's very similar in the case of SpaceX, that, when I invested, it was much later on in their trajectory from a napkin idea or one car sort of situation like Uber. They actually were testing rockets, but they were still blowing up on the launch pad. And so it was pretty nerve-wracking to make the investment, but at the same time, I had a lot of people who were experts in the field that I trusted a lot, and I kind of deferred to them about the future of SpaceX, and that was like Barney Pell and Luke Nosek. And so, it just, that's what got me comfortable with it.
Yeah.
But a lot of these companies like Niantic, Pokemon Go, another one of my investments, similar thing. I went around showing everybody their previous app, which is Ingress, and trying to convince people that this was like a massive idea. And they're like, we don't see it. So, a lot of times that's what it looks like early on, is a lot of people actually don't see it.
I have to confess, that was me at that dinner, because Jason on the when we had to close the dinner down, and we're walking back to a few blocks away wherever we're going to get in the cab, and he goes, I think I got 50K. You want to split it half, 50-50? I said, let me answer tomorrow. And the next day, there was I just thought, there's no way that the governments they're gonna get so much friction from the cab lobbies, and that's what my mind started going there. And so I backed out, and then about a month later, there was a TechCrunch article that the city of San Francisco does a cease and desist on Uber because it was getting popular in the city quite quickly. And I remember, I think I sent it to Jason and said, haha, or glad I didn't. And
yeah, there was some tough moments there for a little while where I was not even sure how they were going to survive it. But I think that's where Travis comes in, right? Like Travis is not going to back down from these types of situations,
right?
And he's a fighter,
right?
And I think in order for a company like that to succeed, you really needed someone like Travis.
Very few people. That was such the right combo of him in that. And that's what I didn't factor in, was when he got those letters, he was gonna force reality to bend.
Yeah.
So I'm curious of the investments you've done. What is there one that you feel most? I don't know if proud is the right word. Or what are you most excited about? Like what do you look back on as kind of your favorite from a professional achievement kind of perspective?
Well, Uber's definitely up there. I think that, if you look across my portfolio of investing, you'll see a common theme which is, applications or services that get you time back or allow you to use your time in very flexible ways. And so Postmates would fit into that. Even the company that I started, Zivity, fits into that because it enabled people who were underserved really in the market and still are, to be honest with you, an avenue of making money in a flexible fashion in their own time. And
I'm convinced if you started Zivity, you were just too early. Clearly,
I was too early, and right now it's OnlyFans.
Oh my God! OnlyFans is blowing up, and it's like you started that like 8 years earlier. It's crazy.
I know. We invented Patreon and Kickstarter and OnlyFans, and we were just too early. And I think by the time I figured out all the mistakes that I made and started pivoting the company towards Patreon, more towards Patreon, it was too late. And I've met the founder of OnlyFans, and he's phenomenal, and I'm really happy with their success. And most importantly, even if I failed in that regard, it was a great idea, clearly, and a lot of people are flourishing from it now, and that's all that matters.
Well, you kind of stole my next question in a way, perhaps. My follow-up question was, what would you consider to be the biggest mistake that you ever made? Was it starting too early with Zivity?
Yeah, I think so. I think, when you're really early, and especially when you're creating a new category of business, which we were, you sometimes lack the marketing or language capabilities to describe what you're doing. So if you go back in time and you look at my early videos of the early, pitch days, I was abysmal at explaining what Zivity was. Like, I knew what it was in my mind, but to try to come up with terminology, like, for example, we racked our brains with the smartest people you can imagine trying to figure out what it was called when you gave an artist money and it somehow translated into micropayments, right? And so we called them voting just because we thought it was funny, and it was a call to action because Twitter was pretty early back then, right? So we wanted people to get on Twitter and MySpace. We were actually competing with MySpace, as in how long ago this was. And basically get on there and call to action to get people to give you money, right? And then along comes, Patreon. And we had inklings of this because some of our early members who backed the artists called themselves patrons. And so we started kind of figuring out, okay, these people don't view themselves as fans. They view themselves as patrons. And I was like, that's really interesting. And that's a whole different set of language, right? Like, back me, fund my Kickstarter, those sorts of things, subscribe to my OnlyFans, these are language that we didn't really have. And
Right.
So, I think had we unlocked that little nugget sooner, we would be worth billions because OnlyFans is. So, but yeah, I think it was a mistake, but at the same time, I learned a lot. I learned a lot about, operating a company. And I think that those learnings led me to amazing investments. Unfortunately, not for my investors of Zivity, which I would have loved to have somehow parlay that success into that. But like, for example, I managed really complicated cap tables, and I did it all in spreadsheets, and often you can make mistakes, which led me to identify that Carta was an opportunity, right? And so, there's weird gifts in every situation. Even if it's a quote unquote mistake, you can find beauty in just about anything. And so in a weird way, Zivity has led me to amazing outcomes, just by the people that I met on the journey and kind of how it developed me as a human being. I also think that the community that we created still is, thriving today. And I see them out, there's models on our site that are now famous, that got their start, and we're all just kind of part of this. I just really wish that I had returned my investors' initial investment, and that's probably the only thing that really eats at me.
Yeah, but I think it is so clear that that is where we are now in 2020. Like the DNA of Zivity was so perfectly aligned with where we are today that every investor in it can clearly see that now, that it was just clearly too early, because there's just no other, there's no two ways about it. What do you think? And I wonder, do you think of yourself? I mean, you're clearly, you were able to take some of the experience there as in doing Zivity, and it kind of paid off, like you said, later as an investor. What would you say is your greatest strengths and or weakness as an investor?
My greatest strength is connecting the dots. So this is something that I honed in on pretty young, actually, before I was an investor, which I'll give you an example. So when Niantic was not an investable company because it was part of Google for a long time, right? And so, a miracle happened and Google split up a bunch of its divisions and spun out Niantic as its own entity. And when that happened, I realized it was a lightning strike moment in which I had a very small amount of time to kind of somehow shove some capital in there. Mm-hmm. And so I didn't know anyone there. And that's when kind of some of my special skills come into play, which is, I don't come off as very competitive, but I can be very competitive. And so all of a sudden, all these stars align in my mind of how to reach someone at Niantic. And it's the weirdest stars, Tyler. They're very strange. So I invested in a company called Hintwater, and I went over to Hintwater one day to help them set up their ticketing system. And I noticed that they had these trouble tickets that were coming in with the subject line Ingress. And I was like, why do you have tickets that say Ingress on them? And she's like, oh, well, we have a deal with Google where, as you're playing the game Ingress, if you drink our waters, there's like little codes on the inside that help you get, things for the game. And I was like, oh, that's cool. Can I have some of those caps?
Yeah.
And then I kind of kept those caps around. And then when that moment happened, when they spun out of Google, all of a sudden everything was like, contact Kara at Hintwater, figure out who she did the biz dev deal with over there for those caps, and that's your in. And so I messaged her and she said, oh yeah, I John Hankey's a friend of mine. Yeah. He did the biz dev deal. And I was like, please put me in touch with him. And so I went and met with him, and he was like, I have enough money. I don't need any money. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. You need my money. And I camped out at his doorstep, went to his office, brought a friend with me who I convinced him to let him in too. And then he hired him. Anyway, it's really a funny situation because, it's a lightning strike moment where you're like, I've got to move, and I've got to move fast, and I've got to get this done. Yeah. Same thing happened with Uber. I didn't know Travis. I met him once, and I had to figure out how to get into that deal.
Yeah.
Because I was out of network. I was not one of the crowd, so to speak. Yeah. So, I would say that's probably my strength. My weakness would be, I don't know, I have a soft spot for people.
You get very empathetic, and you do, by the way. I was trying to figure out what the right way to bring that point up is. Of all the investors I've met, you have a real deep empathy for everyone that you meet. And when I watch you engage with a startup, especially somebody that other people might not pay attention to, you really give them this extra level of attention that it's not normal, and it's very cool to see.
And so I think it's a power and a weakness.
Yeah.
Because sometimes it can make it to where you're spread too thin.
Yeah.
and you can't give enough, and or you believe things that maybe aren't true, but I figure that it all nets out positive in the end, because 99% of people are well intentioned and good. So if I believe in someone falsely along the way, it's just kind of built into the cost of my business, I guess.
So, yeah. What is going through your mind when a startup is pitching you generally? Is there a sort of checkbox or?
Yeah. I start every meeting the same, which is I'm very curious about the person. And so I spend the first 15 minutes of every meeting talking about their journey and how they got to where they're at and why they're uniquely positioned to work on that idea.
Mm-hmm.
And what I'm looking for in that first 15 minutes is some kind of struggle. And struggle doesn't have to be homelessness, or like, our minds go to wild places when we think of struggle.
Sure.
But struggle can be, I come from a tiger family. They wanted me to be a doctor. They made sure I went to Harvard, but I decided, screw it. I dropped out.
Mm-hmm.
Like, rejecting family norms can be struggle, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm just looking for that determination and that grit, to make you a strong individual that can stand against all of those people who tell you that what you're building is impossible.
Yeah, because that's what's coming up, right?
Yeah, that's what's coming.
Yeah.
What's coming is that people are going to say, a really good example that I love to give is company Siren Care. They make diabetic socks, so electronic socks for diabetic people that monitor your feet. The woman, Ron, who started that company, she comes from a long line of doctors and podiatrists. And so she grew up as a child watching her mother, recommend people for amputation of their feet. And it was heartbreaking. And so she was supposed to go to school and become a podiatrist and use the same tools that her parents did that she clearly identified were not working to prevent diabetic foot. So she said, I'm just going to prevent diabetic foot in the first place. So she started sewing these socks in her room and she's one of the first innovators in electronic fabric with sensors in the fabric. And, Nike and Under Armour and all of these other companies have tried to make it, but they're clunky. They have they're not comfortable. They look bad. And this looks just like a sock. Like, you can't even tell that there's electronics in there because it's part of the yarn. And her parents thought she was insane. They were just like, you can't do this. Like, you're ruining your life. You're in your room knitting socks. Like, what's wrong with you? And now she's like one of the most innovative companies. She's winning awards left and right, and she's saving lives. And so I think that's one of the things I'm looking for, which is like, look, I know I'm right. I just have to convince other people somehow I'm right. and, and some kind of struggle. And so I think some people waste those precious moments in the beginning of a meeting, just getting to the agenda, like, show me what you're up to, show me your slides, let's get to it. But you don't learn who that person is if you skip that step, because you've got one precious hour to try to figure out, like, it's like a speed dating session. Like, what is your gut instinct about that person and whether or not they can lead a company to be 1,000 people? Do you think they can? And sometimes they can't, and you're like, okay, well, maybe they had a good COO, at their side, maybe they could. Or then it starts to reframe like how you think about the company and what questions you should ask next.
Right. It's the pillar of the whole thing. And I love your point about, do they have the DNA of overcoming adversity, because that's the next 5 years at least.
Yeah, or more, right? Yeah. Adversity nonstop. It's like an adversity marathon.
Yeah, but a lot of people, if it's their first time, they don't realize just how endless wave after wave after wave of adversity, and some people just aren't cut out for that. So you have to
Yeah.
to factor that out.
Interesting that you brought up Instagram. Instagram was another one I wanted to invest in, but could not even convince my husband that that was a big idea. And, you know, I argued with him. I was like, this is massive. This is huge. And he's like, it's just a camera, like with some filters. Like, who cares? And I said, no, you don't understand. It's made everybody overnight feel like they are a photographer and an artist, and that they can make something special. And there's something really special to that. And I think this is a massive idea. And there were a lot of people, investors back then. I mean, he was walking around the founder trying to get people interested, and they just didn't care. There was only a few number of people who saw the vision and believed in them. And, you know, obviously were rewarded greatly for it.
Yeah. I want to invite the audience who's watching live. You can, if you want to ask a question, you can. And if I like it, I'll put it on the screen and ask Cyan on your behalf. What after that spending that first 10 minutes of the meeting on kind of assessment of the, you know, the DNA, where does it go from there? Like when they start the formal presentation of it, where does your mind go from there?
Ideally, if they have a live product, I like to see it. So I'm a very visual person. Often, almost 100% of the time, I do not Google search people before I meet them. I don't, you know, I might glance at the deck, but I wouldn't assume that I've seen it. And so rather than getting into a deck with all of these details that I can read after the meeting, I'd rather get into the product if it's live. And sometimes this is where people get really embarrassed because they're like, you know, this isn't working yet. I'm so sorry. This isn't working yet. You know, and you and I both know you've done demo days. Stuff doesn't work. And that's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for how well have they executed so far. You know, sometimes perfect is the enemy of good. And so sometimes you discover that in this little product exploration, which is whether or not they'll ever even ship the product in the first place.
Right.
And so sometimes you can see kind of how they think about their product and how they think about go to market just when they're demoing it to you. You know, and you can answer a lot of questions there, which is, are they good at selling their products?
Right.
Which, you know, that's a huge piece, which is distribution and whether or not they can even convince a customer to buy it. And then afterwards, it's usually you only have a few minutes left for fundraising questions, like where are they with fundraising? But by then, if the product checks out, I'm pretty much sold by that point. And if I'm not, then, you know, I'm usually not. There's usually nothing that very rare occasion where I think about it overnight and I'm like, you know what, I'm wrong and I need to do this. But usually I know within those first 15 minutes, 16 maybe once I see the product.
So somebody watching live, Alex here, brought up a great question on this. Like, what is a big no-no for you as you're going through that? What are the red flags that make you just say, I'm out?
Inability to go off script, you know, and to wing it. Because life is all about winging it sometimes.
Yeah, for sure.
And sometimes you even have to fake it till you make it. And, you know, I'm not saying lie to me, but just like pull it together and give me your best, you know, because that's what leadership is about. Like sometimes you don't have a lot of time to think of something through and you gotta, it's like jazz. You got to make it up as you go along.
Yeah. Exactly right. There's musicians who can do jazz and musicians who can't. And it's like, you have to be able to shuck and jive in real time without a script. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's the thing I'm looking for is like, how adaptable are you? Some people are so rigid. They're like, well, if I could just pull up my deck and stick to my script. Right. And I'm like, life isn't scripted.
Yeah.
You know, this isn't going to work out.
Would you say that you even, if you see somebody sticking too close to a script, which you can obviously sense, do you feel a need to see if you can push them off the script and see if they can improvise?
Yeah, sometimes I'll just say, you know what, let's just shut the deck down. Just talk to me.
Yeah.
You know, like clearly, like you've gotten into this weird land of you've been practicing over and over. And usually they're so nervous at this point, right?
Yeah.
You know, you're just like, just shut the whole thing down. Let's just chat.
Yeah.
Because sometimes like there is brilliance in there, but they're new at this, and they've watched one movie and they think that's how it's done. And so, occasionally I can break them out of that, and they're like, great. Sometimes they even sigh of relief. They're just like, okay.
Right.
I'm like, let's start back. Like, let's go on the product. Let me ask you questions. Let me lead here. And then I see kind of how they adapt to that. But if they're not very adaptable to it, the other thing that you'll notice is team dynamics. So one of the things I look for, especially if you have multiple co-founders, is how they handle this together. Does one person become controlling? Do they collaborate with each other? Do they not let other team members speak? And then that's when I'll really drill in on conflict resolution. I'm like, have you guys ever solved the real problem together? And what does that look like? Because they think that the deck is the most important thing, and it really isn't. Like, any investor can read that in their own time.
Yeah. The dynamic, how do they solve problems together? I think every couple goes through that on their first trip to Europe, for Americans anyway. It's like,
yes.
Yeah. I think that's the best relationship advice ever, is like, go on a vacation together with no script and see how you solve problems.
Yeah, I think Bill Murray said that if you go on a vacation to Europe with no script for I think he said 3 weeks, and you get back to the airport and you still are getting along, marry that person.
Lily Lily is watching live, and she asked, is high valuation a deal breaker? Which is,
yes, sometimes.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that is a deal breaker sometimes. I try to stay disciplined in that regard. And, there are some investors who disagree. They're like, look, a percentage of a rocket ship is a percentage of a rocket ship, and I'll take whatever I can get. But when everything is being pitched to you as a rocket ship and they all have really high valuations, you kind of have to reel it in, because we're in the business of making money, and you're not going to make a whole lot of money that way. So sometimes, it's interesting because people are unicorn obsessed, right? And a small percentage of a unicorn could end up being less lucrative for an investor than a larger percentage of a $200 million company. And so you may end up making way more money on a company that does not have the same type of hype around it. So this is where valuations come into play early on, and then some of the earlier terms that you negotiate. So I think, right now I look for being the first check-in, or, a stage where I can get meaningful ownership early. And that way I have the outsized returns later. And, if it's really interesting, because a lot of times people go through YC, or they go through these incubators and they come out, and YC claims that they don't encourage people to come out with all of the same valuations, but it seems to happen anyway. They come out and they're like, think that startups are fungible. And they're like, I have an idea and I came up with it yesterday, so somehow I'm worth $20 million, right? Whereas the other YC company actually has traction and customers, and maybe they're worth $20 million, but they're not the same. And interestingly, these companies come out as cohorts and they feel like they are. And it's sad, because I've seen a lot of companies fail because it would be better for them to have money than to have no money. And so I've seen them come out and say, well, we're worth $20 million. And everybody's like, no, you're not. And what happens is they just sort of fold up and die. So I think some people need to realize kind of what the market's telling them and what they might really be worth. And to be realistic about it. So a lot of the companies I invest in right now have reasonable valuations. And, I have other investors who are all sometimes in awe of that. They're like, how do you find these deals where they're, at 7 million, 5 million? And a lot of that is just, me and my partners, I'm part of a small little firm right now. We look for people who are overlooked, So, that are non-obvious. And that's kind of where the magic really is right now.
Somebody's asking a question. I have my own twist on it, which is, actually, I have two questions, and then we're going to get into the pitches. One of them, I'll pick it up on kind of as a segue where we're at now. Do you think, in terms of these valuations, like the exodus that's happening with kind of the major Sanford, the Valley, New York to a degree, LA to a degree, as it becomes a little more global, maybe this globalness, like, 'cause the valuations in Europe are notably less than in California, and as the opportunities kind of go global and the pitches happen through things like Zoom and everything, might this in general kind of bring down valuations across the board?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, the market has a way of always working itself out. It's just sometimes irrational, right?
Right.
And so I think so. It just, I'm already seeing it, to be honest with you. Like, some of the companies I'm investing in are not in the typical locations that startups were in the past.
Right.
And, their teams are distributed. And as a result, they can live in places where their dollar goes further, and they have a, quality of life that not looking for $200,000, $300,000 to get by. The other thing is that I think it's the only way you can compete with companies like Facebook and Google, who lock up engineers and lock up people and offer them multi-million-dollar packages. Like, as a startup, you can't compete with that. Other than this potential upside in freedom or somehow perks or whatever. But yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see how this all plays out, especially after COVID's over.
Yeah. So the other question is, and this one relates to the person watching live, where do you, kind of speaking of cohorts and whatnot, like when Zivity was ahead of its time, and that's such and so suitable to now in 2020. But what do you see on the horizon in terms of, like, right now we're seeing the Patreon type things, and we're seeing a lot of AI, interesting variations of AIs and VRs, and what are the things that you're thinking are exciting now? Because if you're thinking it's exciting now, it's probably still a few years ahead.
I'd say HR tools. I'm seeing a huge flurry of activity, and the other thing is immersive entertainment. Sorry, my hair is crazy today. Some sort of immersive entertainment stuff, like and then they go hand in hand. I know this sounds weird that they would be tied together, but a lot of companies are struggling with this change in remote work that happened so suddenly, because it was not, it was not a slow process. It was just like, we have to adapt today to this crisis, and we've got to figure it out. And so some things work well, which is, Zoom was in the right place at the right time, which is great. But at the same time, we jump on Zoom calls and they're very intentional. We have an agenda, and it doesn't allow for those sort of random collisions that happen that are magical in
we said it at the same
ways.
time. Exactly.
Like, you walk down the hallway and you see Bob, and you're like, oh, and that triggers this train of thought, and you're like, I need to go talk to Diana about this thing. And that doesn't really happen on Zoom calls. And your brain's in a very different place. And I think also people are getting a little Zoom fatigue. And so I think there's some really interesting innovations in there where people are thinking, okay, how can people build teams and keep people happy and engaged, and innovation still thriving in these big corporate environments? So I'm starting to see a lot of really interesting things that people are coming up with. So if you even look at Icebreaker, or, I'm seeing like corporate, like, what are they going to do for the holidays? Like, a lot of people had holiday parties. Like, how do you do that now?
I just got pitched the virtual Christmas parties. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, is that $1 billion idea? I don't know. But regardless, I think that's kind of the future. if it's remote, it's going to require a lot of innovation.
Right.
It's not, Zoom is just a Band-Aid. It is not going to fix it.
Right.
And so I think that we're on the horizon. We're going to start seeing some really interesting tools for remote management, and
Right.
how we make this really enjoyable and sustainable.
Right.
Because Zoom fatigue, like I said, is real, and I honestly believe as soon as the vaccine is out there and people are less afraid, there's going to be parties where people are hugging and just they can't wait to be at a conference.
Yeah.
I just need to see another human being.
3-minute hugs.
Yeah. So it'll be interesting because I think there will be more remote workers than before COVID, but not as much as there are now because of COVID. And so there's going to be, right now it's massive. And so some people might think that it's sustainable and going to stay that way, but I actually think we're going to shrink again, but not to the original numbers. So clearly the market has expanded some degree, and we need solutions for that regardless. So, and I still think it's a big enough opportunity there that I'm excited about it. I also think the future of entertainment, I'm way ahead of my time on there, because I think that, I think spatial computing is really exciting. And I do believe that, I'm kind of crazy, but I think Niantic could be the size of Google. If people are just starting to wake up to realize what that company is. It is not a gaming company. It's a mapping company. And they've started revealing that a little bit, which is, we are the fabric of what it means to have stateful AR, and the future of spatial computing depends on companies like Niantic. So if we want contextual ads and in the spaces that we're wandering through with our wearables, you're going to need a company like that. And so, Niantic is way ahead of its time.
Yeah.
But luckily still has a magic component where they can make tons of money with video games in the meantime.
Right.
So, it's nice, because I think someday people are going to look back at that company and just be like, wow, it'll be like a SpaceX type thing.
Cool. So we've got 3 startups. There's actually I'll connect you with the other one, the virtual Christmas party.
Sure.
But they're not pitching tonight, but it's another Stockholm startup. But the 3 that I have here is they're kind of randomly selected, and it's really meant to see what it's like to be in a pitch meeting with you. And
okay.
So that's the point of it, really. And so just be you and do you, and that's so people can see what it's like. And
so how long do they have to pitch me?
They get 4 minutes.
Okay.
And yeah, but
so this is a different kind of pitch than one when you're going to come into my office. This is you just saw me on an elevator,
right?
And you've got 4 minutes.
That's right.
All right.
Yeah. I might.
So I'm already kind of cranky.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the valet's holding my keys. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So first up is War on Cancer. Are you there?
I'm there, Tyler.
All righty. Are you ready?
I am, definitely. Do you want me to share my screen?
Yes, please.
Wonderful. Hold on just a second. Might if I just introduce myself. So my name is Fabian Bolin. I'm the CEO and co-founder of War on Cancer. War on Cancer is a tech company on a mission to radically improve the mental health of everyone affected by cancer. And we're doing so through the War on Cancer app. In essence, a War on Cancer app is a social cancer support app powered with mental health coping tools. And what makes the War on Cancer app unique is that we enable our members to participate and provide data through in-app targeted health surveys. Our partners and the buyers of this type of data is going to be leading pharmaceutical companies, healthcare institutions, as well as cancer research organizations. The War on Cancer app is live today in App Store and Play Store, coming up towards 10,000 registered members on the app, and we have members from more than 20 countries. This is the second seed round, or the second funding we're doing. We conducted a seed round in early 2019, where the intention was to raise 8 million Swedish kronor. We ended up raising 9 million Swedish kronor. And we're now coming up towards the very end of this pre-A round. We're raising a total of 30 million SEK with commitments of 28 million, and with some 22 million already in the bank. Below here, you see some of the both early and newer investors. So what is it that we're doing here? Well, we're addressing one of the largest forgotten aspects of going through cancer, which is the mental health problem. So cancer implies severe mental health consequences, including PTSD and clinical depression. I know this firsthand because I'm a cancer patient myself. So about 5 years ago, I was diagnosed with blood cancer. And I've gone through about 900 days of chemotherapy. So I know firsthand what it means to go through cancer and how tough it is from a mental health point of view. The problem is that healthcare today isn't equipped to deal with mental health, and they don't have the resources. And the fact is that not a single doctor or nurse ever asked me the question, how do you feel during this whole period? My way of coping with this mental health problem was to share my story openly in a blog, and I named that blog Fabian Bohlin's War on Cancer. And by doing that, by writing in a blog, I in fact applied several coping mechanisms to dealing with mental health without understanding it. And I'll walk you through these coping mechanisms at the same time as I walk you through the value propositions of the app. So the first coping mechanism is journaling. By journaling, a patient or a member can process in real time the mental health problem it is experiencing. I also was able to connect with people like-minded that actually understood what it meant to go through cancer, which is also another coping mechanism. What you need is empathy, people that understand you. What you don't need is pity, which is people that sympathize with you, which is the problem that a lot of patients have. Thirdly, knowledge. Through this connection with others, I managed to get the answers to many of the questions that I never got from the healthcare, such as what does it mean to go through cancer? But lastly, the impact of feeling that you're helping others on my mental health was profound. This blog peaked at around 200,000 monthly readers, and I can honestly say that I've never in my life experienced a bigger sense of purpose or meaning. This impact our members can get through either engaging in the community or feeling that they're helping others through sharing data. We're doing the first survey now together with Karolinska Institute, where we're asking all our members how they are experiencing the COVID-19 situation. This is just the first in a whole line of the different data sharing opportunities that we're going to be conducting in the future. The value for all of this will lead to, one, the ability for us to find and match patients against clinical trials. 2, to track and understand their health journey, and 3, to improve healthcare across the globe. So to showcase and to finish this off, I want to show how we're marketing these targeted surveys. It seems like now that you can actually see.
Yeah, I see a video.
But you can't actually hear it, right?
Right, no sound. I'm not hearing sound, but we see the video.
Okay, well, you're just gonna have to feel that we're having some cool, engaging video to this as well. Yeah. Right, so it's just this full feeling of making our members feel like they're part of a change and that their contribution to this data will actually mean something, and that they will help to improve the lives of people across the globe going through cancer. And this is the team building this together with myself. Thank you for your time and for listening.
Alrighty, thank you.
Yeah, so thank you.
What goes through your mind there, Cyan? One note that caught my eye that is kind of culturally relevant on the advisors slide or investors slide in the first round. You had KJ from H&M. He's the chairman of H&M, who's I think currently rated as not only the wealthiest Swede at the moment, but also perhaps the best investor. He's been on an absolute tear of fantastic investments in the last 2.5 years, 3 years. So anyway. Yeah, there's the slide.
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of so investors. I think this is a problem of just sort of old world thinking, which is, invest in our backyard, and we have our own little community of investors here in the Bay Area. I'm not familiar with him, right? And so I think that's going to change in time. Well, I'm going to continue. Like, we have to improv, right?
Yeah.
So I think the biggest thing is like, this comes down to distribution. Like, how are you the company that someone is going to write a substantial check in because they're picking you as the one? If they're going to pick any company that's doing any sort of anything in this space, and I don't know the competitive landscape completely well right now. So, why are you the one? And why is this company the one that they're going to give you that much capital? And so I think immediately my heart just goes to, how can I get you in front of Andreessen Horowitz and Sequoia and these firms?
Sorry to interrupt, but the line is buffering on YouTube and everybody's dropping off. Tyler, could you have a check?
Yeah. It's all back now.
Okay, sorry to interrupt.
No, thanks.
Oh, no worries.
Well, that's very kind of you, Cyan. I'd love to have a chat with you later on about that.
Yeah, so that's how this meeting would go in reality with me, which is I sort of stop asking questions because I'm like, oh, this isn't in my wheelhouse. So like, I'm gonna, there's things that we pretend on stage where we pretend to be stage agnostic and give advice and all that sort of stuff. But I do have a stage that I stick to. And so this is not my stage. And so I would immediately go into how do I, because one part of my job that makes me good at what I do is that I'm also a feeder to these bigger funds. And they love having a relationship with angel investors and seed investors because we give them deal flow, and that's the name of the game, right? So I immediately go into, okay, great. This now belongs into a shepherd over to someone else who writes bigger checks category. So I don't have a lot of questions. If I had my Series A hat on and I was at a firm, I would dig into distribution. How are you the one? And monetization strategies, and that's what I would go into.
Good. Thank you for
Hopefully
that.
that's helpful.
Yeah. It is. He'll be trying to get your email address from me shortly. So
yeah, feel free to give it to him.
Okay. Next up.
You all heard that.
Yeah. You're on the record. Yeah. Gigapay, are you there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, you sound great.
Okay, lovely. I'm just going to share my screen and then. Cool. Can you see it?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So 10 years ago, jobs like Instagram influencer or Uber driver didn't exist. And before the pandemic, gig and marketplace businesses had really disrupted the job market. And as a result, a lot of people were entering into the gig economy. And now, during the pandemic, we see that the gig economy has really exploded due to high unemployment and people having to shift into different types of work. And we also see that post-COVID, that one of the biggest issues that countries are going to face is job creation. So as a result, the gig economy will continue to explode. But one of the biggest issues that still needs to be answered is how is this growing workforce, a gig workforce, how are they going to be paid in a compliant manner? My name is Ryan Buchanan, and I'm one of the founders of Gigapay. So we're building a global salary payment infrastructure for a sustainable gig economy. So we take care of the taxes, insurances, and pensions on behalf of gig and marketplace businesses. It's really easy to use, and I want to show you how by introducing you to Joe. Now, like more than 89 million people across the EU, Joe works for himself. And then there's Sue, who's the CEO of Scooters. Now, Sue needs a new web design, so she hires Joe to do the job. He does a fantastic job, so she goes to gigapay.co and starts inputting a few details about Joe so she can do a salary payout, including the total amount, his phone number, and his personal number. As soon as she pays that, Joe receives an SMS telling him that he has a payout to claim. And after he's entered in his bank details, he receives the total amount with all the taxes, pensions, and insurances covered. So it's really that simple. But the real magic happens when Sue has scooters up and running. Did we let Lucia? Or no? Should I just keep on going?
Maybe.
Maybe. Oh, well, maybe I was so boring. Oh, anyway, I'll just keep on going. Anyway, so the real magic happens when Sue has scooters up and running, and she has people all around the city using her app. But what happens when the scooters start to run out of power? Well, she needs to hire gigas, of course. And she's had a bit of foresight. So she has integrated with Gigapay's API so that every single time a giga completes a charge, they will receive an instant payout with all the taxes, insurances, and pensions covered. So it really is that simple. And our business model is that we take up to 5% of the total payout amount. We have a developer-friendly API. We also have a great UI. And we offer the instant payouts towards the gigas. And by taking care of the taxes, insurances, and pensions, we take care of all the payroll-related questions on behalf of the Giga Marketplace businesses so they can focus on growing and scaling their core business. Our traction to date, so we really started pushing the product at the beginning of this year. We've had an average month-on-month growth of 31%. We've had a total payment volume of 4.3 million crowns to date. We're launching Finland next month. We closed our pre-seed round in July. Now, our team has experience from high-growth companies like iZettle, Bambora, and King. We have experience of scaling across other markets. And we will also be looking for our seed round to close in Q1 of next year. And that's basically for our operations, scaling across different markets, and also for our tech team. So if you want to learn more about Gigapay and help us grow the future of payments within the gig economy, please reach out to me. Thank you.
All righty, thanks for that. Cyan, are you still there? Where did I see under participants? She's still listed there.
Do you hear me?
Yeah, can hear you. Yeah.
Oh, perfect. All right. Yeah. For some reason I dropped off, but I came right back, so I caught the rest of the pitch.
Good.
We aren't just having a tech challenging day
You said
today.
you said it at the beginning of the call. Yeah, it's Mercury in retrograde.
We're gonna power through it.
Yeah.
Obviously, this is near and dear to my heart because of the investments that I've made. So I've invested in Postmates, Uber, all sorts of different gig economy type services. And I'm very passionate about that space. I have seen a couple of competitors in the market. And so I'm wondering, but I haven't seen anything in the European market. I've only seen people trying to do this in the US. So I guess my first question would be about the competitive landscape and how you plan on being the dominant player. And is it regional that you plan on being dominant, or is it, is it something you want to do on a global level?
Yeah, that's a great question. And first of all, I thought I had scared you off with the with my pitch when you disappeared. I was like, okay, there you go. No, I'm glad that you're back. So for us, of course, when you look at a market like the US, which is huge, and you have a lot of different complexity in that market, but when you look in Europe, then every single market operates differently, and they have different regulatory and compliance issues. And with our customers today, they're, and the same with the investments that you've made, the way that they become so successful is because they're active in so many markets. And that's really where we're looking to surface, and that's our go-to-market strategy, is that a lot of our smaller gig and marketplace businesses, they plan to go across the Nordics, they plan to go to the UK, Germany, Spain, and with them, we will also be going into those markets and scaling. So that's really where we see ourselves, at least in the immediate future. And I think the US is, of course, a really interesting market, but it's not something that we see ourselves going into in the near future.
Great. Yeah, I think that's a great answer, because I think that gives you a moat, which is a region that you understand better than anyone else.
Yeah.
And I think that, congrats on your pre-seed. That's awesome.
Thank you.
And, I think that you're right. There's the gig economy is going to be the savior coming out of COVID, because as the economies start picking back up again and the jobs come back online, people still want help shopping for groceries and getting food, and those services are still going to be very needed. And I think I've been talking to a lot of giggers here, and they're just incredibly thankful that the gig economy even exists at all, because during COVID, what would they do otherwise? And so I think that it's kind of been the engine that's kept this world running during this pandemic. And I think it's incredible to focus on this sector. And this is a problem we have here in the US too, and there's different companies working on it here. So I definitely see a lot of promise in your future working on this product, and it's pretty exciting. I don't have a lot of questions. I don't immediately know how I can be helpful, other than I have connections to a lot of companies in this space. So if there's any way I can be helpful with that, that's where I would, try to help. And then, I know a couple of investors, when you go out to raise in the beginning of the year, because I saw that you're raising in Q1, I can try to be helpful in that regard. But I think, I'm trying to give a realistic sort of view of how I actually would have a meeting like this. This would be one where I would want to track it and see where you go, and see if there, was a way to participate or know more about you in the beginning of the year.
Yeah, but that's great. I mean, I would love to be, if it's okay with you and then Tyler, then we can stay in touch, because I was really inspired also by what you were saying before. So thank you. I
have a member of my team that's actually in Europe. He's in France. His name is Pascal. And he was one of the first investors in Notion, and was one of the first investors in Checker and helped scale Checker. And he just relocated to France pre-COVID. And so we do have boots on the ground out there, starting to look around. And so I would love to introduce you to him so that he can get to know you, soon. I think that's the nice thing. At the stage that you're at, you can start meeting investors, and, ahead of the time, you're not like struggling to meet them right now.
Yeah.
And so, that way you can forge those relationships. So when the iron and the time to strike is hot, like, you've got those relationships already built up. So I think that's probably the best way that I could be helpful here.
Yeah, wonderful. Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem.
Good to hear. Third out of the three startups, Daniel from Playground. Are you there?
Hi, yes, I am, Taylor. So my name is Daniel Norberg. I'm the CEO of Playground TV. We are creating a kid-safe streaming service to help multilingual kids discover animations in their mother tongue, with kids channels in several different languages. The problem we see with multilingual kids is finding animations are difficult, dubbed in their own language, but also finding animations with their cultural heritage. With our solution, multilingual kids can enjoy animations in their mother tongue and with their cultural heritage in mind. What differentiates us is that we deliver channels in Chinese, Mandarin, Persian, Hindi, French, Spanish, English, and even more to come. The global video streaming market is estimated to be around 340 billion in 2019, with a yearly growth rate of about 12%. And currently there are 270 million people who live in a country and they have another native tongue. 50% of them live in the US and in Europe. Our addressable markets are the 17 million kids who live in these countries are in the age gap of 2 to 9. We make money through serving ads that are not only safe, but are made for kids, as well as subscriptions for the ones who want to have an ad-free experience. We plan to acquire customers through app stores, partnerships with mobile and TV manufacturers, as well as social media. With over 15 years of experience surfacing apps on mobile phones, TV sets, we are well equipped to build a good momentum for Playground. We are in a tight competitive space with YouTube Kids, Disney Plus, and Netflix Kids. But there is limited access to bespoke language channels with content created with a cultural heritage in mind. Playground TV is built like a cable network for kids specifically. We make a free premium experience with kid-safe ads, so everyone can accept Playground TV regardless of income. Our subscription option is for the ones who prefer to remove the ads. We're a team of 10 who previously participated in building several app-based startups, as well as operating systems for smart TVs and enabling them to run streaming apps. We project that we can reach a revenue of $250 million per year in 2025. Our current status is that we launched Playground TV 2 weeks ago in the UK and are just about to roll out in Europe. We're available on iOS, Android, and web with 14 kids channels and over 100 series, 5,000 episodes in 7 different languages. We're currently raising our seed round, or we're starting to raise our seed round in a couple of weeks. And you see, it used to be that parents that search YouTube or use satellite antennas to find their content in their native language, but without the cultural heritage many times. But with Playground, kids that speak more than one language and live in EU and soon to be US can be entertained by animations in the mother tongue. And that means that with a polarizing world, we can enable kids to understand their own and others' cultural heritage and language through animations. Now, I want to show you a demo, and I'm not 100% that this will work. We tried it out before, so let's just jump into it. Here we go. Are you seeing my screen?
Yes.
Yeah.
Good. So then finally it works. So this is Playground. So we start in something that we call the feed. And in the feed, kids can subscribe to different types of characters that they like. And then you can jump in to enjoy. Oh, there we have the crash that we talked about before. So let's restart.
No, Mercury's in retrograde, so we kind of expected that to happen.
So the idea is that for every single child, this feed will be unique when they start watching it. Here we have the other crash. Let's see. So you get a unique experience every time you start it up in the day based on the content that you like. So let's jump into our channels. So currently, as I mentioned, we have 14 different kids channels. They are all on demand with different shows. So for example, here we have Zolan Animation with all Chinese animations. And then we have our own channels that we've created. This one is called Little One, which is the age group of 2 to 5. We spend a lot of time when it comes to the design and the user experience. And we have our own video player that you can see, and I don't want to go too much into the videos. And then we've also the Persian channel here, which is called Se Kokolo, which means the little 3 in Persian. And that's then we have, of course, like a lot of our streaming service, the trailers of what's coming soon. You can go in and navigate by series, but in the base, it will let you enjoy both the content with your own native language, as well as explore what's available in other languages. There you go.
All righty.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Wow. So this is definitely in my wheelhouse.
Okay.
Stage wise and all sorts of things. So that's exciting. You know, it reminds me of my son is 9. When he was like 2 or 3 years old, he came and begged me to pay for something called Activity Mouse, I think is what it was called. And I just, you know, when your 3-year-old is begging you to pay for something, it's really interesting because they clearly got marketed to in the right way, and this was a separate app than YouTube. And
Yep.
so I would look at their marketing, because I think they were able to penetrate just, on YouTube, an interested audience that would pay for educational videos, so I think there are children obviously sitting watching YouTube, and I guess that's the real challenge, is identifying kind of what language would perk their ears up and be like, oh, that's something I understand, that's a language that's spoken around my house, and then go agitate their parent, because they're the ones who have to open their wallet. First of all, I'm going to go back a little bit. Sorry, I'm all over the place because I'm kind of excited about this, but the design of your product is really great. So I want to,
Thanks.
I mentioned earlier with Tyler that I love to see a working app, and and seeing how you designed it and kind of how exciting it would be for a kid is really cool. I think the other thing that is the other issue on the other side, which is, as a parent, we give our children sort of unfettered access to YouTube Kids. And I found that a lot of the ads are not safe and are not child appropriate. And some of the subject matter that he weeds into, I don't approve of. And so I think if you created a safe place that parents could trust you and say, you know what, go wild and free on here, because I trust that you're not going to run into depictions of violence and things that I don't agree with. I think that's how you could really set yourself apart too, because even in an English speaking market, like, we don't have tools for that are particularly good. So, I think this is fantastic, and I would love to talk to you more about it outside of this event.
Great. Looking forward to it. Would love to tell you more and show you the iPad experience as well.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you also made it for Android. So a lot of times I see people who come up with apps and they're iPhone only, and you're missing out on a huge market out there, especially of kids who can't afford devices like that. And so and I think this is really great to make this type of material accessible to I'm really also excited about the Persian stuff, because I have a Persian family, and so I grew up in a multilingual house, and my stepfather's Persian, my brother's Persian, and he had nothing to learn his native tongue from, and other than family members and some exposure here and there. But if you want kids to learn about a culture of which they come from, language is incredibly important. So I think this is great.
Totally agree.
Yeah, you'll another cultural point, Cyan. Persians are, I believe, you guys will correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's safe to assume, the largest immigrant group in Sweden, and they, as you will probably not be surprised, are disproportionately represented in the startup community in Sweden.
Awesome.
Yeah. In fact,
that's fantastic.
Some of the unicorns are even the 10 or so unicorns in Sweden. A couple of them are Persian. So,
are you plugged in with Pejman? I assume you know Pejman.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Pejman is like the king of the Persian mafia.
Yeah. In the valley. Yeah. It's they've done really well. They in tech, and it's the True Color guys are fantastic. Anyway, but it's not so much a strange coincidence what he's to a Swede this solution, because there's a Sweden in a weird kind of way, from an American perspective, has kind of taken over the American role of welcoming immigrants to a degree. And so you've got the Polish came over during the fall of the Soviet Union, and then the Persians came over during that revolution, and in more recent years the Syrians, and when they had to leave Syria, and you've got a lot of different groups, and that's why this kind of is not surprising to see a solution like this come out of Sweden. So.
Well, hopefully America gets back to those roots.
Yeah. Well, there was news of that today. Oh, I think Biden made a statement today that he's going to greatly increase or reopen the refugee kind of numbers that Obama had, where I believe Trump had banned all refugees for his 4 years. But anyway, we don't need to. Every conversation in America seems to steer off into politics land, which we don't need to go there. But anyway,
right.
Thank you for the pitch, and I loved your feedback, and I believe he did too, no doubt. And that's the 3 pitches. Any kind of closing thoughts there? I know I would love to be helpful, and there was that 4th startup that I mentioned around the HR solutions, and I'm glad I asked you that question about where you think things are going. Yeah, that's about it. It's really cool to watch you do these pitches, because I think when I asked you what your superpower is, one thing that you didn't say that I found, and what I was doing while they were pitching was watching the other people watch you, and you have a real way of being very unintimidating, which I think and the War on Cancer is nodding his head yes. It's like, and I think that is your superpower, is they're able to, like you kind of said earlier, like let their shoulders down and relax and just start relating in a much more personal way. And I think that's why, if I had to guess what your real superpower is, I think that's why you've been able to get in to some of the amazing deals that you have, because people just really are able to be real with you because you're so real with them, and then you take out.
Oh, well, thank you.
Yeah,
that means a lot. Like,
yeah.
I mean, we have to get real, because if we're going to be in a relationship where I can be helpful, it doesn't suit anyone to just sort of say like, I'm slaying it and everything's great, and
right.
It's like, because I know the truth. I'm a startup founder myself, and I know that you're not always slaying it, and everything isn't always up and to the right. And a lot of it is just a journey in which we're trying to figure out where to go. And it is jazz, we're improvising.
Yeah.
And so, it's nice to see different stages here, because, War on Cancer is much further along than Playground. And, it's really fun to see. And Gigapay is right in the sweet spot, and so I think it is interesting to see. And I like that people got to see that, there's different questions and there's different paths that you can go depending on stage, obviously. Yeah. Startups are not fungible, right? Like I mentioned before, they're all unique and different with different needs.
Cool. So I will do the follow-ups via emails in whatever way seems appropriate for everybody. I have just a couple of announcements to make before we say our final goodbyes. There's your 3 pitches, the announcements. There is a really cool initiative just launched yesterday by Antler, which is one of the largest and newest accelerator, incubator type programs, where they work with founders at the idea stage when you don't even have a team. And they're now growing into multiple markets. And they have joined forces with AWS and Ericsson and Nordea and many of the biggest companies in the region to create 1,000 new startups. So if you have a burning new idea and you want to get in, this is all for free. They don't charge anything. So you can reach out to them directly. I'm actually a mentor in this particular program. So you can reach out to me and I can connect you as well. But the URL is restartthefuture.com. So you can take a screenshot of this and go to restartthefuture.com. Then you have Sting is another accelerator. They are having new applications until November 18th, which is today. So go to sting.co/accelerate, and they offer up 500,000 Swedish, and coaching and community and office and support, with no real strings attached. Sting.co/accelerate. And then there's a demo day coming up November 27th, the Impact Accelerator, put together by Danske Bank, Rise, and WeWork Labs. And so that is coming up, and I can get you the URL for that as well, but you can Google Impact Accelerator Demo Day and you'll find it. So that'll be coming up, and I'll actually have it in our YouTube channel. The STHLM Tech YouTube channel will embed it live in our channel, so you can watch it there as well. And that's our announcements. And thank you again to all our partners. But I really wanted to one more time say thank you to our special guest, Cyan. Thank you for taking the time and phoning in.
Thank you, everyone.
From the Bay Area there. And thank you to all the startups and all of our partners. And we will see you all next time in December. Cheers, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.